Will be a third hearing on Senate Concurrent Resolution 10. I have witness slips for this bill, and we will start with Mr. Anthony DeBias. Thank you for your patience, sir.
Thank you very much. Chairman Burke and Vice Chair Huffman and Ranking Minority Leader Nikki Antonia, and members of the Senate Health, Human Service, and Medicaid Committee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to provide opposition testimony to SCR number 10. I'm opposed to that because Ohio legislators will be advancing what I call a quid pro quo that will not only penalize subsidies to boards of public health and local health departments for not achieving measurements of consumable biological pharmaceutical products, but will also financially incentivize the promotion of measurable, specifically defined medical procedures. Promotional incentives for consumable products and/or for medical procedures in law or via administrative code violates Ohio constituents' human and inalienable constitutional rights, which all legislators vowed to protect by their state and U.S. Constitution oaths of office. It is discouraging to me and to many people when legislators use financial incentives to encourage constituents to unknowingly and slowly and insidiously relinquish their human and inalienable rights to adhere to any health system products or procedures. Previous legislative sessions needed to be commended for allowing thorough legislative approval and public oversight of administrative code changes. This kind of oversight needs to be continued to avoid circumventing the legislative process. And to me, using resolutions are incremental and insidious ways of creating an atmosphere whereby over time, the resolution will then easily be affirmed as a natural piece of legislation going forward. I want to thank you for your time. I encourage you to vote no on this. If you have any questions regarding my testimony, I will try to answer them.
Thanks. Very good. Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions of the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much
for your time.
My next witness slip is for Michelle Cotterman. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Chairman Burke, Vice Chair Huffman, Ranking Minority Member Antonio, and honorable members of the Health and Human Services and Medicaid Committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak in opposition of Senate Concurrent Resolution 10. My name is Michelle Cotterman. I am a registered nurse and a mother to 2 school-age children. I am opposed to SCR10 based on my concerns of the proposed language in Ohio Administrative Code 3701-36-05. I am opposed to the government using coercive financial incentives towards county health departments to increase vaccine product consumption by those entering kindergarten, 7th, and 12th grades. A consumer product should stand on its own merits and without the need for the heavy hand of government. I am also opposed to the idea of publicly posting the rates of vaccine product consumption, as this information has little bearing on true immunization rates. As you may be aware, immunity is solely dependent on the bodily response to a natural or artificial exposure. Immunity gained via artificial exposure, like vaccine product consumption, has a known tendency to never elicit an immune response or to lose immunity over time for some consumers. This is known as primary and secondary vaccine failure. For example, during a clinical trial for Menveo and Menactra, it was found that 21 months, that's less than 2 years after receiving the vaccine product, up to 77% of recipients were no longer immune to various bacterial strain types contained in these vaccine products. This is one of the vaccine products listed in the Ohio Revised Code 3313.671 that would be a part of the quality indicators related to increasing consumption and subject to payment of state subsidies for meeting those standards. True immunization rates would be dependent on monitoring antibody titers and posting the percentage of those who have adequate levels. It would behoove the Department of Health to move towards a titer-based vaccine program as opposed to a one-size-fits-all model. We call this ethical vaccinomics. I would like to draw your attention to a previous testimony by Dr. Ted Fogarty that is included in my written submission and explains these concepts further. At this time, I respectfully request that you vote no on SCR10 and prevent the progression of this concurrent resolution. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
Very good. Thank you much for your testimony. Any questions of the witness? Senator Robner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. You mentioned that you're opposed to government using coercive financial incentives towards county health departments to increase vaccine product consumption for those entering kindergarten, 7th, and 12th grade. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Why?
Correct. So, according to SCR10, the Ohio Administrative Code changes that are being proposed, one of those quality measurements is increasing vaccination rates for kindergarten, 7th, and 12th grade, and that is one of the standards that is a requirement or a procedure for payment of the state subsidies. So meeting that standard, increasing the vaccination rate, according to the OAC language, would then affect reimbursement to the state county health departments.
But can the parents and the families can still opt out? I mean, there's no financial pressure on them.
Chairman Burke, Senator Rogner, that is correct.
Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on.
We do still have exemption rights in the state of Ohio, but I'm sure that you're aware that using financial incentives to coerce, persuade, or otherwise manipulate citizens into consuming those products will then lead to further actions and future legislation that would then lead to the necessity of removing those products because of the financial aspect.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to emphasize that according to the Ohio Department of Health, the rule change is related to vaccines, okay, is simply a data reporting requirement to local health districts, including no personally identifiable information. And the claim that LHD funding is related to vaccines is actually incorrect. It is not. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
My next witness slip is for Nadera Lopez Garty.
I didn't cut you off.
It's nice to meet you. I'm actually one of your constituents, finally. My pleasure. Thank you. Chairman Burke, Vice Chair Huffman, and honorable members of the Health Human Services Medicaid Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today in opposition of SCR10. My name is Nadera Lopez Garrity. I oppose SCR10 due to a couple of concerning proposed rule changes in the Ohio Administrative Code 3701-36-05. The first of which is outlined in paragraph B, section 10, and seeks to increase the vaccination rates of children entering kindergarten, 7th, and 12th grade via financial incentives. Financially penalizing county health departments unless they meet such standards will not only lead to coercive tactics that are highly unethical and in violation of the Nuremberg Code, but it also fails to address the shortcomings of a practice that is not bulletproof in neither preventing disease nor promoting good health, both of which the ODH has been entrusted to protect and improve, as they proudly assert in their mission statement. The scientifically sound realities of primary, secondary, and tertiary vaccine failure must be taken into consideration if we are to concern ourselves with the prevention of disease, promotion of good health, and assurance of a safe and healthy environment. We recently witnessed this reality last fall when there was an outbreak of Bordetella pertussis in Warren County, Ohio, whereby 100% of those cases occurred among vaccinated individuals. A staggering yet not surprising report considering the overwhelming body of evidence that reveals the shortcomings of the pertussis vaccination program. In August 2017, the ODH advisory board members failed to take heed of such evidence when a medical professional attended the ODH board members meeting, urging them to inform the public of the fact that when exposed to pertussis, vaccinated individuals are capable of contracting and spreading the bacteria unbeknownst to them. Since both the DTaP and Tdap inoculations are toxoid vaccines, meaning that it merely attempts to elicit a temporary and limited immunity response against the toxoid released by the bacteria, but not the actual pathogen. Additionally, peer-reviewed scientific reports reveal that the genotype strains covered by the whooping cough vaccines have mutated, making those who have been vaccinated susceptible to the pathogen and thereby affording them and our community, including those who are immunocompromised, nothing more than a false sense of security. When presented with the above information that was also reported by the Food and Drug Administration, the response and sole concern of an ODH advisory board member who happened to be a practicing physician was that they did not want to create smoke. The same types of failures are observed among other vaccinations, including the MMR vaccine manufactured by Merck, which has also been under litigation in federal courts since 2010 on fraud charges, accused by their own virologists of significantly falsifying the efficacy data of the mumps portion of the vaccine by utilizing rabbit DNA. Another alarming fact kept from the public whenever mumps outbreaks occur, but one that should be duly noted by anyone, especially departments that are concerned about protecting individuals from disease and trying to assure a safe and healthy environment, instead of financially incentivizing the uptake of such biologics. Live virus vaccine shedding from such products and the failure to avoid close association with susceptible high-risk individuals for up to 6 weeks following inoculation must also be taken into consideration if we're to truly concern ourselves with the prevention of disease and the promotion of a healthy environment. The Disney outbreak back in 2015, whereby over 38% of the cases were vaccine-associated, was a good reminder for that fact. Unfortunately, they stopped reporting the genotype strains after that incident. Some suggestions that may help the Director of Health adopt rules establishing both minimum and optimum achievable standards that would optimize the health of Ohioans include, but are not limited to, the introduction of measures that would improve the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which is a passive reporting system that captures less than 1% of adverse reactions, as evident by the Harvard Pilgrim study funded by the CDC. Such an initiative would make our state a pioneer in its quest to implement standards that would protect people from disease and injury. Providing funding opportunities for scientific studies that would address the IOM's urgency to conduct research to elucidate the factors that place certain people at risk of reaction would also go further in protecting people from disease and injury. Tighter testing and genotype reporting could provide the information needed to assess measures that would assure a safe and healthy environment. The revision of truancy laws and employees' abilities to abstain from leaving a quarantine environment of their comfort when sick could further prevent the spreading of disease and assure a safe and healthy environment for all, including the immunocompromised. We vaccinate for 16 infections, yet are exposed to countless of other pathogens on a daily basis to which no inoculations currently exist, and oftentimes lose sight of what is truly important when it comes to supporting the immune system via the promotion of healthy lifestyles that cannot be achieved through standards that are driven by financial incentives. Last but not least, the proposed OAC 3701-36-05 rule outlined in paragraph C, section 10, would violate our rights in accordance to the Ohio Constitution, which explicitly states in Article 1, subsection 21A, that no federal, state, or local law or rule shall compel, directly or indirectly, any person, employer, or healthcare provider to participate in a healthcare system, which includes the management of healthcare data or healthcare information for its participants. It is unfathomable that such a potentially blatant violation of Ohio's constitutional rights have been considered, but thankfully we have these checks and balances in place to give our legislative bodies the opportunity to honor and uphold that which is most sacred. Keeping all the information in mind, I respectfully urge you to vote no on SCR10. Thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Very good. No, thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Ms. Senator Maharath?
Today. Sorry, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you driving down here during a snowstorm. So as what my colleague already mentioned, that ODH had already listed that this is simply changing vaccination data report requirements from infant to 6th grade to now include 7th to 12th grade provided to the local health districts. And like she already mentioned, it's not gonna include any personally identifiable information. So over in my district, we have a lot of refugees and immigrants, as we've welcomed lots of refugees and immigrants in our state for decades. I have some mainly from Asia. So Asia, we're really well known for having hepatitis B because we don't have that adequate treatment over in Asia. So that's one of the vaccinations we have to take to prevent it. So what would you, I guess, recommend that we would do then in case that the data is showing that there's hepatitis B, but your suggestion that we shouldn't vaccinate these kids, especially if they're going to public schools?
I never made such suggestion. Sorry. Senator Burke, Representative Maharath.
It just says that you're just opposed against all these vaccinations, but it's okay if you don't think that you said it. We can just take it offline. We can have a discussion in my office if you like.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be happy to. Thank you.
Senator Huffman?
If this bill passes, how many more people, Ohioans, will be required to take any type of vaccination?
If this bill passes, my concern with the bill is actually that it would incentivize the schools and the nurses through the Department of Health, for them to get monetary, the funding, that they would have to increase their rates. And therefore, you get into the issues of coercion, which we do see.
Okay. But the answer is none.
The answer is this has nothing to do with that issue. It has to do with what I just noted.
Well, no, but the question was, if this bill passes, how many more people will be required to get immunizations?
There is not a requirement for
Okay.
immunization.
Okay.
Senator Gavarone.
Thank you for your testimony. Can you please provide me the exact rule that ties funding to increased vaccination rates?
Right, in the SCR10, it says right there that the Ohio law requires the Director of Health to adopt rules establishing both minimum standards and optimum achievable standards for boards of health and local health departments, that a formula for distributing state subsidy funds according to the level at which those standards are met. So if these standards are met, then that's what the distribution of those state funds depends on that. And part of pushing the standards, as stated on the report, is to increase the percentage of 7th and 12th graders to receive vaccination.
No, very good. And again, I'll follow kind of the line of thought I think that Senator Gavarone's going down, because I had the same thought, of course, going through the bill. I'm not sure if the Department of Health could legally count in people who are legally excluded from the activity, because for religious, medical, or personal exemption, I don't know how you could legally count people into a census where that census doesn't apply to them in the first place.
What is your question?
Well, I'm saying that if
Senator.
you want to increase the percentage of people who get vaccinated, that would only be the people who would be eligible to be vaccinated in the first place. And the state has exemptions for vaccination. So you couldn't count people who are exempted in that count, because they would never be eligible to be vaccinated in the first place.
Are you talking about medical exemptions?
No, I'm talking about the method that you're discussing with a mechanism for reimbursement that the state has set up. It'd be impossible, and I think it would be illegal for the state to distribute funds to a local health district if it counted in people who were already excluded from being vaccinated into the percentage of people who are unvaccinated, because those people are unvaccinated for a legal reason. So you couldn't withhold funds from people that are legally excluded from being counted in the first place.
The concern comes with the push in order to receive funds, that the penalization would cause the nurses within the schools, as a result from the health department's push, to increase the vaccination rates in order to increase those funds. And therefore, we lead into tactics that are coercive, and we have observed those tactics take place.
But, and again, I'm just, in my mind as I think about how things play out, but wouldn't the coercion actually be to get vaccinated or seek an exemption? I mean, don't you think these are kind of people in vaccination purgatory who haven't done one decision or the other?
You would think so, Senator Burke, but that's not always the case.
All right, very good. Well, I appreciate your testimony. Senator Rogner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is definitely an intriguing discussion. I think the witness is going, what you're saying is, because there are these financial subsidies or bonuses, if you will, attached to increasing the percentage of those that get vaccinated,
Correct.
that there will be pressure placed on those that are either providing the vaccination or in schools encouraging the vaccination. And I think, to answer Senator Gavarone's question, I think it was 3701, 3605, talking about, and you referenced that in your testimony. I just looked it up. The immunizations measured by increasing the percentage of children entering kindergarten who are fully vaccinated. And then later it talks about the payment of health district subsidies, and I think this is also what you're referring to. The administrative code may be paid an additional, may be paid an additional subsidy amount for each optimal achievable standard met on a per capita basis, according to the most recent U.S. Census Bureau's population figures, As determined by director, okay. In addition to compliance with one or more of the optimal achievable standards, a health district must comply with all minimum standards to qualify for an additional subsidy. So I think, are you saying that because of these subsidies are hanging out there, that there'll be increased pressure on families that otherwise wouldn't want to be immunized, that might feel like they're pressured to immunize their kids?
Senator Burke, Senator Wagner, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Well, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Burke.
Absolutely. My next witness slip is from Rashana Golden. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Chairman Burke, Vice Chair Huffman, Minority Ranking Member Antonio, members of the Health, Human Services and Medicaid Committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide a testimony to my opposition to SCR10. Financially incentivizing the use of biological products never proven safe and allowing the public posting of such information has no place. I'm here today, my name is Rashan Golden, and I'm here today speaking for my family and for our beautiful daughter who was stolen from vaccine-induced seizures 15 months ago. And we're speaking for hundreds of thousands of other innocent lives tragically and senselessly stolen. Decades ago, Health and Human Services commissioned a study which found that vaccine injury and death are not rare, but rarely reported, finding that less than 1% of injuries or deaths are ever reported. A 3-year study was determined that over 2.6% of vaccinations were followed by an adverse reaction. At the time was more than 35,000 adverse reactions, including death. Therefore, irresponsible and false is the slogan that vaccines are, quote, safe and effective. Not one vaccine has ever been truly safety tested as is required of all other pharmaceutical products. Vaccines listed as biologics undergo days, perhaps a week or two, of tests conducted by the very makers themselves. And such tests do not undergo the gold standard of true double-blind placebo safety testing. That said, all other pharmaceutical products require years of safety testing, with many makers already repeatedly found guilty of fraud and corruption. No safety tests have ever been conducted on the injection of ingredients, stabilizers, adjuvants, or preservatives such as aluminum, formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, residual fetal protein DNA, glyphosate, retroviruses, animal cells, MSG, E. coli, thimerosal, or mercury, yeast, antibiotics, peanut oil, and not one safety study is shown to do what these do to any one body. Vaccine inserts list a host of adverse events, yet inserts and the list of ingredients are not in almost all cases ever provided to parents or individuals. Most doctors admit they were never taught about vaccines, just told to follow the CDC schedule, which operates with huge conflicts of interest. The CDC vaccine schedule, 5 doses in 1962, 24 in 1983, and is now inflicting 72 doses in today's children. The most vaccinated generation is almost the most chronically ill, with over 54% of children living today with chronic disease and autoimmune disorders. Pediatric cancer, the #1 killer of children, reads on 13.1 on the vaccine insert. Carcinogenesis, mutagenesis, impairment of fertility has not been evaluated for carcinogenic or mutagenic potential or for impairment of fertility. The U.S. has the highest infant death rate in the industrialized world and gives hepatitis B vaccine on day 1 of life. Hepatitis B can only be transmitted via the mother through sexual intercourse or an IV drug. Vitamin K, also given on day 1 of life, has a black box warning, but parents are often never given this insert. Parents and individuals are not told about VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or that many doctors are financially rewarded for keeping their patients vaccinated. Parents are often not told about the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which gave all pharmaceutical makers and doctors complete immunity from any and all liability of their neurotoxic products. After the passing of this act, the CDC vaccine schedule skyrocketed from 24 to 72, with almost 300 more vaccines in the pipeline. The World Health Organization met recently at the Global Vaccine Safety Summit and echoed my very comments here today stated was that doctors today are beginning to question vaccine safety, and Professor Heidi Larson stated that, quote, a lot of safety science is still needed, end quote, that doctors, quote, are lucky if they have half a day of training on vaccines, end quote. Understand pharmaceuticals and insurance companies are respectively the #1 and #2 lobbyist group in the U.S., with gross and criminal amounts of money dumped into many arenas, all to the injury and demise of the world's most precious asset, its children. To date, over $4.2 billion of taxpayer money has been paid out to the less than 1% of injuries and deaths reported. Adverse events such as asthma, allergies, diabetes, ocular palsy, SIDS, seizures, gastrointestinal disorders, encephalopathy, Guillain-Barré syndrome, nervous, blood, cardiac immune disorders, psychiatric and respiratory disorders, and death are listed on vaccine inserts rarely ever provided to patients. Autism, epilepsy, pediatric cancers, and others continue to rise. Schools are busting at the seams with special needs children, and heartbreakingly, most parents are like we once were. Most are unaware and blindly trust a safety science that does not exist. Meanwhile, every single hour, precious innocent children and adults alike are being severely injured and senselessly taken. In closing, I would like to just say the truth needs to find light. Countless lives depend on it, and our daughter Haley's beautiful life was stolen because of the dark, soaked in lies, corruption, and greed. Over these 2 years or so, we have met with countless others walking a similar path, so I respectfully ask each and every one of you to do your due diligence and educate yourself. I ask you to hear the voices of those who know that vaccine injury and death are not rare, but they are very real. Dr. James A. Shannon of the National Institutes of Health stated, quote, the only safe vaccine is one that is never used. And in that regard, I thank you for listening, and that's the reason that I ask you to cast a no vote on SCR10. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for your testimony and personal story as well, Ms. Golden. Any questions of the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time. My next witness slip is for Doug Golden. And thank you for your patience again as well.
No problem. Thank you. Chairman Burke, Vice Chair Huffman, Ranking Member, Majority Member Antonio, and members of the Health and Human Services and Medicare Committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide written and verbal testimony on my opposition to SCR10. I agree with my wife that financially incentivizing an uptake of biological products never proven safe and allowing the public posting of such information is no place. The Department of Health and Human Services gave Harvard Medical School a $1 million grant to track the passive vaccine reporting surveillance system, VAERS. In short, the goal was to revolutionize and make VAERS accurate and active. The most dire failure of VAERS is the vast underreporting of vaccine adverse events, which leads to a dangerous false security in vaccine safety and an enormous assumption that benefits far outweigh the very great number of real risk, including death. Former FDA Commissioner David A. Kessler estimated the reports, and I quote, represent only a fraction of the serious adverse events, less than 1%, end quote. From 2006 to 2016, 3.1 billion vaccines were given just in the United States. Again, if you recall, the 3-year study determined that 2.6% of vaccines given experienced injury, and 2.6% of 3.1 billion is 82 million injuries by vaccine. That's monumental. This is more than the entire millennial generation, which is approximately 72 million, and this is more than the entire population of California, Arizona, and Texas combined, approximately 75 million. The reality is that hundreds of thousands of vaccine injuries and deaths occur each year. Mainstream media creates fear-mongering over childhood infections such as measles, which, by the way, actually offer greater benefit later in life. So what is all the crisis talk about with not one U.S. measles death since 2003? Could it be that mainstream media refuses to report the stories that hundreds of thousands of families such as ourselves who beg to share but are refused because most mainstream media is bought by pharmaceutical companies pushing their agenda? An agenda that affords corrupt and fraudulent makers a projected $77 billion profit by 2024, all the while having absolutely no liability to their neurotoxic products, never proven safe and effective. Adverse events such as gastrointestinal disorders and diabetes, as listed on the inserts, also have a willing and pharmaceutical maker all but ready to provide a remedy to their created ailment, bringing total pharmaceutical profits into the trillions. An entire generation damaged and robbed by vaccines, with my daughter's beautiful life absolutely stolen because of the touted safety science never proven. Autism in 2004 was 1 in 166. Today, autism has increased to 1 in 59, mirroring the increased vaccine schedule. Epilepsy, now 1 in 26, is linked to heavy metal toxicity with mercury and aluminum, both proven responsible for such neurological disorders. And yet, individuals and parents ask, cry, and beg to be heard, while pharmaceutical companies dump blood money into the pockets. The FDA, CDC, and IOM choose to ignore its citizens who repeatedly request safety studies to be done, and therefore, I am asking you to act responsibly and not ignore those who you represent. The public posting of vaccine product consumption rates absolutely do not reflect true immunization rates. Using money to punish county health departments whose citizens decline a pharmaceutical product is inappropriate and unethical, and government has no place using financial incentives to push a for-profit pharmaceutical product that is identified from liability. I want to thank you for your time today, and I urge you to vote no on SCR10, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Golden. Any questions of the witness? Seeing none, I appreciate your time. My next witness slip is for Kiona Shipley. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. I'm hangry now, so I'm ready to go. Chairman Burke, Vice Chair Huffman, Senator Antonio, and members of the Health, Human Services, and Medicaid Committee. Thank you for my opportunity to provide testimony on my opposition to SCR10. So my concern is about the content of the bill that you are supporting in SCR10. In particular, I'm concerned with the proposed OAC 3701-36-05 for the following reasons. Do you not see it as unethical to use money to punish health departments for the percentage of people who choose to decline on an elective pharmaceutical product? These products come with zero liability. So remember that baby who died in the bassinet, right? The bassinet collapsed, the baby died, and there's like a huge uproar, and they were pulled from shelves, and it was all over the media. But yet these products have zero liability. So when something happens to our children, there's then nothing we can do, no one that we can turn to. And by now we know that these injuries are not rare and that they actually happen every day. Also, I don't understand how we can offer financial incentives for the consumption of a pharmaceutical product. So is that what this whole thing is about? Just to use money to be able to drive desired results? I mean, I believe that's what Nader was talking about. Like, that's the slippery slope that we're going down, right? So for me, the only thing I was thinking last night is if that's how we're gonna do things, then where can I sign up? Like, who can I throw money at, right? It's tax season. I've got money. Like, can we throw money at people and so I can get things to go my way also? That's just the way I see it. I think that was it. Yep, that was it. So I just respectfully ask that you vote no on SCR10. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Shipley. Real quick, though, does anyone have any questions for the gentlelady? We'll start with Senator Gavarone.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm looking at the rules now, and granted, this is a resolution. It's, the rules are So I'm looking at the rules in place. 3701, 3610 talks about payment of health district subsidies, and I don't see anything in here that ties it to vaccination rates or vaccinations. I don't see anything in here. Where are you seeing?
In the same SCR10, I don't know if it's the same one, it was 36-05. So when it talked about how, same thing that Nadira said, how ages K, 7, and 12, right? So you have to meet a certain limit or, rate. They need a certain amount of kids to be vaccinated in order to receive the funding.
Excuse me, maybe follow up? Oops, when I look at 3701, 3605, the only change just includes a reference to include the data for 7th through 12th grade. It doesn't tie anything to subsidies.
You have it handy?
It specifically says increasing the percentage, so that it depends on increasing
Perfect.
the percentage.
And it is 3605. 36-05.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Senator Maharath.
Thank you for being here, especially during the snow, of course, as I mentioned before. So just like the U.S. Census, in order for us to get information to fund any healthcare from a federal level, we need data. So this is simply increasing the data we need to push it to now include 7th to 12th grade. So how can we collect this data then if we don't increase the information needed? I understand that you're fearful that this information is going to be used solely for funding, but how are we supposed to determine funding if we don't have enough data to collect?
Well, I think that was kind of my point. Why do we have to use funding as a way to increase rates?
So it's just to talk about how we are distributing funding. So let's say, for example, with the U.S. Census, we need to get the information to collect money for Medicaid, right? Uh-huh. So that's the way I'm looking at this concurrent resolution. So if we don't have enough data to move beyond what we have currently, which is infant through 6th grade, what can we do then to get more information to collect what data we need for whatever, et cetera, health department?
Right. So I'm not saying don't collect the data, right? So whatever means you use to collect the data, that's fine. The way I interpret it was that, let's say, so a pediatrician, I think it's 62% of their patients have to be up to date on vaccines or they don't get their bonus, right? So I interpret it to be the same way. So if a certain amount of children aren't in the census, if a certain amount of children don't have their required vaccinations or even on time, then this funding they will not receive, right? So that's my point, whereas they're kind of dangling over their head like a carrot, right? So that is however you get the information and use it. Obviously, if names are involved, that's fine. Truth, at this point, I don't care. But that is my point, is that, it just seems like they're gonna have to now find a way to hit that number, right? Or they won't get their funding. Oh, that's hot. Which isn't fair, for anybody.
I completely understand your frustration, but I think the intention is to get more data. Of course, that's, we're not getting any personal information. We're not changing the vaccination policy or anything like that. We're just simply trying to expand the data we're collecting to include 7th through 12th grade.
Correct, but I think that I would add yet on the end of that. And then here, public positioning, accordance section 3313.617 of the revised code, if that helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions of the witness?
Thank you.
Seeing none? Thank you very much for your time today. You're correct. Yep. Those are all the in-person witness slips that I have for this bill. And I know my colleagues will have written testimony as well on their iPads for their review if they haven't already. Is there anyone wishing to testify to Senate Concurrent Resolution 10 to whom I do not have a witness slip who wishes to testify? Seeing none, I'm going to call up, and I know I'm going to catch her cold, Lisa Griffin with the Department of Health. And again, I know we have been in constant contact since this resolution came forward. And be clear, I first want to just put on the record, I appreciate LSC and their analysis of this proposal because we take it very seriously and what it does, and what it means, as well as the Department of Health's response to some of these key questions as I know constituents have raised, on the phone or via email and in testimony today. So I just have a couple questions for you, and I'll start with the premise that these folks have their protections enshrined in statute, and rule does not trump statute. So you cannot vaccinate people who are not willful participants in receiving a vaccine. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. These rules have nothing to do with vaccination rates, who gets them and when, that sort of thing. The only way this rule change touches on vaccination is just the data reporting requirement that Senator Lehner pointed out earlier. Currently, kindergarten through 6th grade, the data is reported to local health districts. This will just be 7th to 12th grade data reporting to local health districts, and it is not tied to their funding. There is a rule change on their subsidy, and there is a rule change on the data reporting. It is one rule package. I mean, it's different rules that are being changed, but they are not tied together. So if vaccination rates go up or down and the local health district gets the data, that does not affect their funding.
Okay, so in its simplest of terms, and if I could just reiterate what you said, whether their vaccination rate is 0 or 100%, you're telling me that is not tied at all to the subsidy that's in the same rule.
That's correct.
Any questions while we have Ms. Griffin here? Senator Rogner.
Thank you. We heard several witnesses come forward and say that, in fact, the subsidy to the health department is tied to rates of vaccination, and pointing to 3701-36-10. So are you saying that's not accurate and that there is no tie between the subsidy to these health departments and increasing the rates of vaccination? Because I think the underlying concern is the government using funding to push vaccination onto families? And are these rules in any way doing that? That's what we want to get to the bottom of.
So Senator Rogner, I don't know the specific, I don't know where they're seeing that in 3701-36-10 in the rules. But I do know that one person pointed out lines 7 through 11 of the resolution, but that does not speak to, the tying of the vaccination rates and the rule changes, or I'm sorry, in the subsidy.
If I may follow up, because this is really curious. Thank you for the follow-up. So the 3701-3610, it talks about payment of health district subsidies, right? And in there it says, in addition to compliance with one or more of the optimal achievable standards, a health district must comply with all minimum standards to qualify for an additional subsidy. And yeah, so I mean, can that be tied in any way to this 3701-3605, where it says immunizations measured by increasing the percentage of children entering kindergarten who are fully vaccinated? So I guess can those dots be connected? And I think that's the underlying concern of the witnesses we've heard here today. And I think it's a valid question.
So Senator Rogner, Chairman Burke, so we heard from some legislative offices that this concern was coming up. I checked with our legal counsel. I also checked with the local health districts, AOHC, Aaron Ackerman, and their team, and they are not tied together. The vaccination rates and the subsidy for the local health districts are not tied through these rules, through this rule change.
Thank you.
Senator Lehner.
I would just like to comment. I heard at least one of the witnesses, and I'm not sure if it was you, Ms. Chipley, who, when asked if this was tied, responded, "Not yet." And there was another one who made a similar comment that my sense was that there's fear, there's concern that this may happen, but we don't generally, unless there's really, really strong evidence of something, just sort of make a leap to assume something bad is going to happen because it's something we worry about. And I don't think there is language in the rules that have been promulgated to begin to tie that concern that we are somehow paying people off to get vaccinated. I think that's a real leap. And so that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Any additional questions on Ms. Griffin? I appreciate you being here and answering these questions on the cold. I would probably only ask, and again, I know it's obviously public record, but if it's possible, just to have in hand from the Department of Health the statement that SCR10 does not tie vaccination rates to funding within the set of rules that we're talking about. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, you've publicly said it, but I would probably sleep a little better just having that document in my hand related to SCR10, what we're voting on, that's not what's happening here.
Yes, I can get back with you. I provided an email, I think, to your office and also to Senator Lehner's office on this topic. And then if it's helpful, I can also work with the local health districts.
Yeah, that'd be great if you don't mind, because I certainly like to, my colleague's point, I don't want that being some kind of subliminal, because if people are questioning it, then somebody's reading it differently than what some other folks are reading it as, and I just would like to have a document that says, no, that's not what's happening here, just for clarification.
Sure.
Because
sure.
otherwise, you know, these things go to some court somewhere and some judge reads it, and next thing you know, you're off to the races, and it's like, oh, that's not what I meant. And it's long gone from my hands, right?
Yes.
So I would appreciate that very much.
Okay. Chairman, could I say
Sure.
one more thing? So this resolution is finalizing rules that have already gone through agency review, public hearings, gone through CSI, gone through the JCAR process, received approval through that. And this is why that requirement for legislative, this is coming up because of the requirement for a legislative resolution finalizing the rules. So this would not be authorizing future changes on these rules. It's just something I wanted to point out. Those would go through the normal rule process. They have to be based on law. If they're not based on law, they would not make it through the JCAR process. Just if that helps to clarify.
Absolutely. I think you can also hear, you know, or at least the volume of constituent issues that we've had on this particular subject matter. These folks, I think, just want to rest assured that they're excluded from this, right? This is not supposed to be inclusive. And I think that, you know, that clarification, at least in my mind, I can't speak for, you know, other folks, gives me some solace that that's not what's happening here, and not just intent. That's actually not what's happening here because it's in writing. So if you could give that to me, I'd be
absolutely
additionally relieved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lehner.
Yeah, I just want to sort of add, it's not really a question or anything, but we're living in a time where there's a lot of distrust about a lot of institutions. And I don't know how many of you have just recently watched The Pharmacist on Netflix with, you know, how the opioids have been sold to the public by Big Pharma. And I think that it's very easy sometimes to assume that when something's happening here, it could be happening over here as well. And so I appreciate people being suspicious and concerned. And I think if there is anything we can do to verify this for folks, it would be helpful, and then to make sure it really doesn't happen regardless of what they say or may not say today, that it does not occur. So
Very good. No, thank you very much. I just appreciate the comments, and thank you for your time very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, wait, Senator Kunze may have a question for you.
I was just going to say thank you for being here. Thanks for providing the information in writing. I think we're grateful for the families who have, and for the advocates who have come in and shared their story. But I also wanted to just make clear, if there were to be, the next time the rules come before, or I may make a change, I wanted to reiterate something that you said. there is opportunity for public input every time rules are being reconsidered, or if there is something that needs to be changed. And there is a process, and people can come before JCAR, and there's lots of opportunities for public input. Would you say that's a correct assessment?
That's correct.
Okay, so, and I think we always, we've had very long JCAR meetings with lots of testimony at times. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that that opportunity still exists for future considerations.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate your time. And then if you could just send that to my office at your convenience, I'll communicate that to the colleagues here on the committee.
Will do. Thank you.
And that does conclude the written and in-person testimony. This is start for a vote. What would be the committee's pleasure on Senate Concurrent Resolution 10? Senator Gavarone?
Mr. Chair, I move that we favorably report SCR 10.
Second. Seconded by Senator Maharath. The clerk will call the roll on SCR 10.
Chairman Burke?
Yes?
Vice Chair Huffman?
Yes.
Senator Gavarone?
Yes.
Senator Kunze?
Yes.
Senator Maharath?
Yes.
Senator Roeder?
No. Hung them up? You didn't call me. No. Yes.
Okay, having sufficient votes, the motion carries. The chair will leave the roll open till 12 noon tomorrow for members that have signed in but are not present.